Good morning, kids, and welcome back to Providence Kids Online. I hope you guys had an awesome week settling into school or settling into temporary school, or maybe you haven't even started school yet. But whatever it was, I hope you guys had a great week. We are in the middle of our unit that is studying different miracles of Jesus, and we have learned so much so far. Last week, we looked at Jesus feeding the 5,000 and saw how he cared for the people that day, just like he cares for us. Today, we're going to be in Matthew 14 again and pick up in scripture right where we left off. After Jesus fed the 5,000, he sent the people away. Then he directed the disciples to go back across the sea to the other side. And when everyone was gone, he went up to a mountain by himself to pray. While he was spending time alone, the disciples were working their way across the sea, and they came upon a large storm. Now, if you remember, on their way across the first time, they were in a big storm, but Jesus was with them that time, and he calmed the storm. This time, Jesus was not physically with them. But what I love here is that even though Jesus was a few miles away, he was aware of their troubles, and he still came to save them. And not only did he come to save them, but he walked on water to get to them, showing that he is God. This is something that could only happen by God's power. Think about it. Have you ever tried to walk on water? What would happen if you were trying? You would sink, except if God's power was allowing you to do it. So the disciples see Jesus walking toward them, and when they figure out that it's him, Peter asks Jesus to call him out onto the water, to which Jesus says, "Come." Peter gets out of the boat and begins to walk on water, yet another sign of God's power. But as soon as Peter saw the wind and the storm around him, he began to sink. Peter took his eyes off Jesus and moved to the stressful circumstances around him, and his faith weakened. What a picture that is for us. When we aren't focused on Christ, we also start to sink. When our hearts and minds become more focused on our stresses and fears and worries and concerns that are swirling around us, our faith is weakened. Look at Peter's response here, though. As he begins to sink, he recognizes what's happening and he cries out, "Lord, save me." Jesus calls Peter out on his weakness first, rebuking him, saying, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Jesus wanted to use this moment to remind the disciples that our confidence must always remain in him, regardless of our circumstances. And then Jesus, as soon as he rebuked Peter, reached out and took a hold of him. I love this picture of Jesus' love, care, and kindness extended toward Peter, just like he extends that to us. Clearly, the disciples see here that Jesus was no ordinary person. He was the Son of God. Jesus proved here in this miracle that he is worthy of our trust and that he is who he says he is. Now, you might be thinking at this point, that was a really cool story, listening to Jesus walk on the water, but how does it apply to me? So if you missed it, I want to remind you one last time. There will be times when we have fear and doubt and stresses swirling around us. The reality is that will happen again and again in our lifetime. And in those moments, Jesus is telling us to keep our eyes fixed on him, that our confidence must remain in him. But when we start to sink, because at times it will happen, we can cry out just like Peter did, saying, "Lord, save me." And Jesus will answer, and he is always with us in those moments. That's all I've got this morning. I hope you guys enjoy the Bible story, have an awesome week, and I will see you on here next time.
Jesus had been teaching crowds of people by the Sea of Galilee. It was getting late, so he told his disciples to get into the boat and go to the other side of the sea. Jesus sent the crowds away and went up on the mountain to pray by himself. That evening, the boat was far from the shore. The wind blew and the waves tossed the boat around. Jesus was still on the mountain alone. Around 3 a.m, Jesus came toward his disciples walking on the sea. When the disciples saw Jesus, they were terrified. "It's a ghost!" they cried. Right away, Jesus spoke to them. "Have courage, it's me. Do not be afraid." Peter answered, "Lord, if it really is you, tell me to come to you on the water." So Jesus said, "Come." Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water toward Jesus. But when Peter saw how strongly the wind was blowing, he was afraid. Peter began to sink. "Lord, save me!" he cried. Jesus reached out his hand and grabbed Peter. Jesus said, "You have little faith. Why do you doubt?" They got into the boat and the wind stopped. Then everyone in the boat worshiped Jesus and said, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Jesus proved that he can be trusted. His miracles, teaching, death, and resurrection showed that he is who he says he is. Only Jesus can save us when we look to him in faith.